Well, hello everyone and welcome. My name's Amanda Poole Walsh. I'm the founder of Astrology Hub, and I am here with the Merlin, Rick Levine. And we've decided that we needed a title for our steady Friday date. So Rick came up with something awesome. Well, we'll ask you what you think, but we're thinking to call this the Cosmic Connection. So every Friday you'll have you can grab your tea or your glass of wine or whatever it is and join us for the Cosmic Connection. And today we're going to be talking about retrogrades. So Rick, go ahead.
Well, before we move into talking about retrogrades, if we're going to call this the cosmic connection, we should talk about the word cosmic
Yeah.
because most people don't understand that it is actually a word from the Greek, and in ancient Greek, often words meant different things at the same time. But unlike modern English, where we have words that can mean two different things, those two different things don't have any connection. But in the Greek realm, they did. And the word cosmos actually meant order, like the order to things. When we think about cosmology, it's how everything is in order. And so the word cosmos means order, but it also meant beauty. And so to the Greeks, the fact that something was in order or was ordered was in itself inherently beautiful. Now, the reason why that's so important to understand is, like many words, we've lost the meanings of the words based upon layers of cultural biases, if you will. And so we have the word microcosm, which is the tiny order, and macrocosm, which is the large order, the astronomical order, if you will. But we also have the word cosmetic, which actually has the exact same derivation, because it used to mean bringing out the natural order or the natural beauty. Whereas in our modern aberration, the word cosmetic really is to hide the ugliness.
Mm.
And so this is a very important, if we're going to call this the cosmic connection, we should understand what the word cosmos actually means, because this is part of the large predicament that humanity is in right now. And that is this illusion that we need to cover the ugliness of the natural order, whether that is eliminating mosquitoes with DDT, or whether it's taking out a forest so we can plant crops for money, or whatever it is. There's, ever since the Enlightenment, there's this sense that the intellect of humanity has to overcome and manage nature, because nature by herself is obviously not going to do okay, and therefore we have to use our modern sense of cosmos or cosmetics to cover up the ugliness of what exists. So there
So
you go.
if we were, it's brilliant. If we were to align with the original term order, when we're talking about the cosmic connection on Fridays, what would be your vision of the kinds of conversations we'd be having around that
Well,
context?
like this one, because it's not just about order, it's also about beauty. Bucky Fuller, one of the great minds of the 20th century, said, when I'm working on a problem and I come up with a solution, if it's beautiful, I know it's the right one.
Mm.
You see, and we've lost that a bit. So if we're going to be talking about the cosmic connection, we're not just talking about the movement of the planets in some sort of sterile observer mode of what's out there and what can we do to make this bad situation, like retrograde planets, what are we going to do to make those okay, because that's awful. No, that's the cosmos does not have the good or evil judgment. We humans have those judgments. So if we're going to be making cosmic connections, we need to bring out the natural beauty that was in William Blake's words, were there and hid. because there's the beauty that is there, that if we do our job correctly, we can bring out that natural beauty rather than overpainting it with some sort of artificial paint to make it look what we think is beautiful.
Mm. It reminds me of a conversation I was just having with my daughters, because we had the Saturn workshop Q&A this morning with Anne Ortley for the Do Your
Yeah.
Saturn workshop. And so I started talking with my daughters about their Saturn. And Sophia's Saturn is in Libra and Madeline's Saturn is in Virgo. Both of their Saturns are in the 10th house. And everything I was saying about Saturn in Virgo, Madeline was interpreting as bad. Well, how come there's nothing good about mine? How come there's nothing good? And so we finally got to this point where it was like, your chart and the blueprint of you is perfect. It's perfect in its design. It's perfectly designed to bring out in you and to bring you the experiences that your soul needs to have in this lifetime. There's no Sophia's Saturn's better than your Saturn.
No, but wouldn't it be a Virgo-like Saturn that would want to know what was wrong with it?
Totally. I said, Madeline, why don't you pay attention to the fact that I also said that you are committed to beauty and you want things to be beautiful. And she said, well, and I said, how come you forget that part? You're only focusing on the self-critical part. So it was really interesting to be in that conversation. But okay, so this conversation is around the order and the beauty of the universe and our relationship with it, our position in it,
and bringing that to current moment. The fact of the matter is that opposites need to coexist in order for there to be a perception of anything. In other words, you can't have a perception of up without a perception of down. You can't have a perception of good without a perception of evil. Old philosophical discussion. We could, rattle on those opposites ad infinitum. But the fact of the matter is that the tides have to come in and the tides have to go out. Otherwise, there's no movement. And if you're setting your ship in the water to head out to sea and the tide's coming in, well, that's bad because it just keeps pushing you back up onto shore while you're trying to get somewhere. And so, but the fact of the matter is that those tides coming in are also bringing in food and nurturing and even if you're living on the bounty of the beach, that the clams and the oysters and the crabs all live on that tide coming in. So this whole good bad thing, which we all do naturally because we're brought up that way, it's part of the binary nature of our nervous system. A neuron is either firing or it's not. Things are either yes or no ultimately. And so when we come to retrograde planets, we come from a history of retrograde planets being bad or being difficult or being bothersome or being a trouble spot or being the downfall or being a curse or being afflicted, which would be a good astrological word that I think many of us moderners have done our best to lose. But afflictions were something that if you were studying astrology 75 years ago, you would learn how to look at a chart and immediately find the afflictions, which are just, planets that are either, do not have essential dignity, or actually more importantly, planets that are square or in a difficult aspect or in a difficult house position, or retrograde.
So we're talking about retrogrades today because we have so many retrogrades happening right now.
Yes. And retrogrades are not uncommon. They're part of the cycle. I mean, it's the only planets that go retrograde are all of them. In other words, well, the sun and the moon don't because technically they're in a different rhythm. But we on Earth are going around the sun, and every planet from Mercury to Venus, which are both inside of the orbit, closer to the to the sun than Earth, but both Mercury and Venus. And then outside of Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, just to stick with the quote unquote main planets. All of those planets are also going around the sun, as is the Earth. But when they come close to the Earth, they look like they move backwards. And the ancients knew this and watched these planets. It's really why the planets are called planets, because the word planet comes from a Greek word planeta, which means wanderer. And most of us have learned this in school somewhere, that that the planets are the wanderers. But they wander because they move forward. They're all moving in the same direction, and then arbitrarily they go like this, and then they go forward again. And it's like they do this. It's not just moving forward, they're wandering, and they all have their own different rhythms of wandering. Some of them are very noticeable and reliable, and others of them are a little bit more confusing. And I think the most confusing of all the retrograde cycles was the retrograde cycle of Mars, which was the key for Johannes Kepler calculating the laws of planetary motion, which most people today just don't understand what a big deal that was. I mean, they were just mathematical laws, but no, it was the first time that human thought pushed out into the divine proportion, into the realms of God, and actually applied rationality, human logic, to what was previously outside of the realm of human conception or understanding. And in fact, it was the retrograde orbit of Mars that was the dilemma. It was the brain killer, because all the other planets had like normal retrograde cycles, except Mars was just totally confusing, because it was just under just under a 2-year cycle. And yet it would race through 11 signs of the zodiac in less than in almost a year. And then it would spend upwards to like 5 or 6 months in one sign. And it was like, oh, how did this happen? And Kepler's contemporary, a Danish astronomer named Tycho Brahe. Most people say Tycho Brahe, but I got it from the Danes. It's Tycho Brahe. That his observations were the most precise observations ever made in history. He developed the tools at his royally funded observatory on an island in Denmark. He developed these incredibly accurate observations. And when he convinced Kepler to come work with him, because Kepler was the mathematical genius of the time, once Kepler was with him, Tycho Brahe wouldn't give him the data because he was afraid, and actually because Tycho Brahe noticed that Kepler's Jupiter was conjunct his midheaven, and he was fearful of the fact that Kepler would gain prominence and become famous, and that Tycho Brahe would become just a statement in a shadow in history, which is obviously what happened. But because of that, Tycho Brahe kept the data from him. And it was only when he died, and there's actually a backstory that some people claim that Kepler had a hand in his death, and that's something we will never know. But it was only when Tycho Brahe died that Kepler got all of his data that Tycho Brahe was dribbling to him. And he got all of the data, and he focused on Mars. And I don't remember what the time period it was. I think it was about a year and a half, where he just slaved over these numbers, and he figured it out. It was like doing a Rubik's Cube. And when he figured it out, and he recalculated with his formula the orbit of Mars and its retrograde pattern, he realized that Ptolemy's old calculations, which everyone had been using, but they were never exact, they were off by 8 minutes of arc a year, 8 minutes of arc. And Kepler said, I have touched mountains, and it is tremendous what belch forth. I have robbed the secrets from the ancient crypts of Egypt. I mean, he was like flipped out. But what all this means is that retrogrades have always puzzled us, because in fact, before we shifted from an Earth center to a sun centered model, the way that the planets moved were the planets were orbiting Earth, but they had what were called epicycles. So on their orbits, they would kind of go do this like pirouette, if you will, in place, and these were called epicycles. And when we shifted from the geocentric to a heliocentric model, the whole need for epicycles disappeared, because retrogrades became a phenomena based upon the optical illusion that when something is close to you, you use that as a frame of reference, and therefore you lose track of how it is moving against the larger frame of reference. I'll give you a very simple, clear case of this. Anyone who's ever been on an urban train, a subway or an elevated or a monorail, where you're going along in a direction and there's a train on the track next to you, and you look out the window and you look at it, and all of a sudden you go, oh my God, that's going backwards. And then you realize that it's going the same direction as you, it's just not going as fast. Yeah, and we've all had that kind of moment of disorientation. It happens in a car when you're at a red light and you're not driving, and the driver takes his foot off the gas, and you just start imperceptibly rolling forward, and you look at the car next to you and you go, oh my God, it's going backwards. It's that. And so there's two key things here. Number one is the planets don't really go backwards. They're always going on their regular path. It's just that because when they get close to Earth, they look like they're going backwards. The same thing as if you're on a train out in the country, and there's a freight train on the other side of the valley, and it's going slower than you, and you can see as you look out the window against the mountains or the forest or whatever, you can see that train is moving the same direction as you, but you're moving faster than it. And then as the trains come closer and closer and closer together, because it's coming up to a bridge and they're going to be right side by side, if you look out the window then, because all you can see is the train, you can't see its reference to the mountains in the background, you look out the window and now that damn thing's going backwards for a moment until the mind puts it together. So all the planets go retrograde when they get closer to Earth. And this is a key piece that I think most astrologers don't get. There are some, I've heard some people talk about them. I mean, I think that there are some people who spend time with astronomy and astrology. I know Gary Caton was the guide, and I think he's a pro and a champion at some of these, reframing the awarenesses based upon what's really going on rather than what we think is going on when we look at a flat chart. I mean, the planets are not on flat charts. But the thing that we moderners sometimes miss is that although when we've gone to computers, we've gained a tremendous amount of facility with the numbers and the positions of the planets and the aspects and all the interrelationships and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's all amazing. But there are some techniques that have fallen aside. Just as an example, declination is a technique that many astrologers have dropped because it doesn't fit on a flat chart. And that is that we know the planets go around the sun, as does the Earth, but all the planets also go up and down based upon the tilt of the Earth, just like the sun is at its northernmost in the beginning of the summer, and at its southernmost the beginning of winter. But all the planets go through that declination cycle. There's another measurement, though, that used to be a part of calculation of a chart, and that's something called distance values. And most astrologers have never heard of them. They don't use them. It's just something that's dropped away. And basically what a distance value is this, is every planet has a range of being able to be closer or farther away from the sun. Doesn't matter what the planet is. Pluto has a certain distance at which it's always the closest to Earth, give or take a few million miles. But Pluto also has, in other words, if we're born with Pluto conjunct the sun, that Pluto is on the far side of the sun, which means that Pluto is the distance from the Earth to the sun, and then the distance from the sun to Pluto. So Pluto is far, far, far away. But if Pluto is on the same side of the sun as we are, that actually shows up as an opposition because the Earth is in the middle. And so if you have Pluto opposed the sun, Pluto has to be retrograde. Has to be. Why? Because it's closer to Earth than it ever can get. And this is the thing that people don't realize. A planet that's retrograde is closer to Earth than that same planet that's not retrograde. This is the only thing you need to know about retrogrades. And then everything else, even the afflictions and the bad judgments, all make sense all of a sudden. And I love going for the concepts behind, because once you learn them, then you don't have to remember all the rules, because you got the idea rather than just the delineation, if you will. So here's the way this works. For the outer planets, and I say outer planets, I mean anything outside of the orbit of Earth. That would be Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Those planets, when they are in opposition to the sun, in any chart, in every chart, they have to be retrograde. But it's not just when they're in exact opposition. It's really when they're within roughly, not exactly, roughly the trine. If you think of a circle divided by an equilateral triangle into three, into three equal segments, and you put the sun on one point of that triangle, when a planet goes between the opposite 2 points, approaching the opposition, but in other words, the opposition and roughly 60 degrees one side, roughly a sextile one side, and a sextile another side. It's not exactly that, but conceptually that works for thinking how this works. That's when a planet turns retrograde, an outer planet. The inner planets are different, though, because the inner planets, when they're closest to Earth, they're between the Earth and the sun. They actually come into the Earth's space. And in other words, they actually infringe upon the space between the Earth and the sun. The outer planets never can do that. But Mercury, which goes around the sun the fastest, Mercury takes 88 days to go around the sun. In fact, the Mercury cycle around the sun is 1/4. It's 1/4 of the Earth cycle around the sun. It's the astrological origin of the seasons. There are 4 seasons a year, roughly 90 days each. Mercury takes 90 days, actually 88 days, to go around the sun once. So as Mercury is going around the sun once, it then catches up to Earth. And each time it goes around the sun and catches up to Earth, roughly 3 times a year, it looks like it goes retrograde, because it gets close enough to Earth that we lose perspective. It's the subway car on the track next to us, and it's like, what the hell? That's not going forward anymore. It's going backwards. No, it's going in the same direction. It's just moving slower than we are from our perspective. And the same is true with Venus. Now, Venus is a particular case because Venus, of all the planets, goes retrograde less often than any other planet. And Venus's retrograde cycle is absolutely important and magical. And again, many astrologers will know some of these facts, but most astrologers have never put this together into a coherent picture, which I'm going to do right now. And that is the magic of Venus and her retrograde cycle. Many astrologers recently have talked about, even written books about, good books, about what we call the Venus star. In other words, Venus, if you're standing on the sun, Venus catches up to Earth 5 times every 8 years. And each time Venus catches up to the Earth from the sun's point of view, it does it about 72 degrees away from where it did it last time. Well, 72 degrees astrologically is a non-Ptolemaic aspect, which for those of you who know my work, know that I believe it is as important as a square or a sextile, but that would be a quintile, 1/5 of a circle, made by that magical 5-pointed star. And the magical 5-pointed star is magical for many reasons. From sacred geometry, the 5-pointed star really is the symbol of the metaphysical universe rather than the cross, which is a symbol for the physical universe. Because when you have 90 degrees, that manifests as reality. So when you have aspects that are conjunct square, opposed square, conjunct square, opposed square, doing that cycle, which are all based on 90 degrees, because you have 2 planets, 90 degrees, that's a square, another 90 degrees, that's an opposition, another 90 degrees, that's the square from the other side, another 90 degrees, and that's a conjunction. So the 90-degree angle is the angle of the 3-dimensional world, the material world. It's also the angle of Saturn. If you think of the symbol of Saturn is the 90-degree cross with kind of like a backwards S hanging off the bottom of it. And the important thing here is that the cross pre-Christianity was known as the cross of the material universe, the cardinal cross. The points on the compass, the north, south, east, and west, are basically the points of the ascendant, IC, descendant, MC, midheaven. And those are the cardinal points. Those are the places where reality pops into being. The 5-pointed star, though, is the symbol of the feminine earth religions. It's a feminine symbol rather than the masculine 90-degree angle, because it's not physical, it's metaphysical. The magic of the 5-pointed star is that it's mathematically where metaphysics becomes physics. So if you think of the rose, for example, is a 5-pointed star that kind of continues spiraling in. That's it, with, instead of points on it, they're rounded edges. But the rose as a symbol of love, well, the quintile is the aspect of love. It's the attraction to perfect aesthetic that makes us want to manifest things physically. I mean, there's a physical side to love, obviously. Venus in Taurus, physical. Venus in Libra, her other sign, is more intellectual, an air sign. But coming back to the retrograde cycle, Venus turns retrograde 5 times every 8 years, and over that 8-year period makes a 5-pointed star in the sky. Now, here's the magic to the Venus retrograde cycle, and that is that the ancients, and I talked about this, I believe, in the relationship workshop that we did. I know is still available, but I believe this was a short segment in that workshop, because Venus, which is the planet that initiates the desire for relationship, for love, for romance, the medieval artists and philosophers, the Da Vinci's and the Botticelli's and the Albrecht Dürers, the Michelangelos, they were all puzzling over what is beauty. This was the question: what is beauty? Well, we moderners know it's Venus. Venus is beauty, and of course, if you're a romantic poet like Keats and you write, beauty is truth, truth, beauty, that is all you know on earth and all you need to know, there's the whole movement of romanticism that beauty and truth were in fact one and the same. So here's the deal. Da Vinci basically came across this notion that, and I don't think it was I think he got it from, this goes back to the Masonic teachings and back to Egypt, and that is that there is a ratio in nature that is inherently beautiful. The ancients called this ratio the divine proportion. We moderners call it the golden mean. Same thing. It's often represented by the Greek letter phi, not pi. Pi is 3.14, dot, 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 dot. Phi is 1.6 or 1.62 or 1.6180339, dot, dot, dot. It's another one of those numbers that never ends. But the ancients, the Egyptians, certainly the Greek architects, built phi into everything they made that was sacred. In fact, the Great Pyramid, if you take a measurement from the very tip of the pyramid, the tip top of the apex of the pyramid, and you take a measurement that's called the apophthegm, which is the distance from the top of the pyramid to the middle of any one of the four bases. That becomes like a basic measurement of any pyramidal structure. And you take that, and then you divide that by the distance from that point to the ground quarter. So in other words, it's the four sides of the base of the pyramid are all the same. If you take half of one of those sides and divide it into the slant height of the pyramid itself, that turns out to be 1.6180339 to the craziest infinite decimal that you could possibly imagine. That's how important that number was. The stonemasons, the masons, as part of their initiate order, knew that whenever they constructed anything that was sacred, all the churches, if you've ever been to any of the cathedrals in Germany, in France, in Italy for sure, and even in England, the rooms are all built to the divine proportion. And the doors and the windows are so that the width of a window would be 1 unit long, whatever that unit would be, and then the height would be 1.6 or 1.62 units tall. So here's the crazy thing, and we'll bring this piece to a close. The crazy thing is that the only way to get to this magical number that seems to be tied to the aesthetics of perfection and beauty. Da Vinci illustrated an entire book on beauty that the whole thing was a study of the ratio of 0.618 or 1.618, the golden mean. The only way to create this number without a computer is to create, with a compass and straight edge, which one can do, a 5-pointed star. Because when you create a 5-pointed star, each of the lines on the 5-pointed star, when you just draw it out, when you draw that out, every line on that 5-pointed star gets intersected by 2 other lines. They cross 2 other lines, which divides every line on that star into a short line and a shorter segment and a longer segment. And it turns out, lo and behold, that if the short segment is 1, the long segment is 1.6180333. And if the long segment is 1, then the entire line together becomes the 1.61803. It's the point at which the additive, multiplicative, and exponential universes all come together. When you take phi, 1.618, and multiply it times 1.618, you get 2.618 to the same crazy. It's crazy. Now, bringing this back to Venus is this: that the one of the ways in which we calculate the golden mean or the divine proportion is by creating what we call the Fibonacci number series. We take 1 plus 1 equals 2. And then we keep adding the number behind it. 2 plus 1 equals 3. 3 plus 2, the number behind it, is 5. 5 plus 3 is 8, and so on, 13, 21, 34, 55, 89, 144, etc. All right, so it turns out that these Fibonacci numbers are in everything organic. I mean, right down to the little bony filaments in our cells, a molecule called clarithin, which is a protein, and these protein structures that create the bony fiber that holds the cells together, they're created by 5, 8, 5, 8 of these molecules, 5, 8, 5, 8, 5, 8, Fibonacci numbers. Venus makes 5 conjunctions with Earth every 8 years, making a 5-pointed star. The actual truth of this is that Venus resonates to Earth at the frequency of the divine proportion or the golden mean. Very simple. It takes Earth 365 and a quarter days to go around the sun once. It takes Venus 224 and a half days to go around the sun once. 325 and a quarter divided by 22 and a half is 1.62. Do it. I mean, it works on any calculator. It turns out that Venus is the rhythm of beauty, and it traces this 5-pointed star. But as such, its retrograde cycle is other than normal. It's not like well, it is like clockwork, but its own clock, because it doesn't fit into the normalcy. We can't say that there's 3 Venus retrogrades every year like we can Mercury. All the outer planets go retrograde for 4 to 5 months or so at a time, once a year. But Venus turns retrograde basically once every year and a half. And so it kind of is harder to measure in our calendar. And actually Mars is the same. Mars and Venus both have these, they don't go retrograde every year. And so it's unusual for Venus and Mars to go retrograde the same year, which they are now. And it's unusual for them each to be going retrograde when so many other planets are retrograde. But you see, it's not that it's unusual for the other planets to be retrograde at the same time. It's unusual for so many of the slow-moving planets to be clustered together in the heavens. And that's why they're turning retrograde at the same time. Mm. In other words, it's because Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto are all within about 10, 15 degrees of each other. And so when they get opposite to where the sun is, as the sun begins to, from Earth's point of view, move farther and farther away, one by one, they will all go retrograde until the sun comes back around from the other side and they'll all begin to go direct again. So it's less that, it's less important that they're all going retrograde at the same time. I'm not saying it's less important. That's an artifact of the fact that they're all clustered together in the sky at the same time. Mm-hmm. Now, Venus and Mars are outliers, and Mercury, because they're not tied to that outer planet, to the outer planet scenario. And so that makes it a little bit more complicated and a little bit more interesting. Regardless of all that, the fact is that in late April, Pluto turned retrograde. And then within 5 days, on the 10th, 12th, and 14th, well, depending on where you are, some of that may be off into one calendar day on the Earth. But on the 10th, 12th, and 14th, just this past week, first Saturn, then Venus, and then Jupiter all additionally turned retrograde. So right now we have the 3 heavyweights in Capricorn and tipped into early Aquarius, soon to all be back in Capricorn. We have Pluto, Saturn, and Jupiter, plus Venus, all going retrograde at the same time. And yes, there is a backward stirring, if you will, when the planets go retrograde, because they are covering territory from Earth's point of view that's already been covered. From their point of view, though, they're not. From their point of view, if you do heliocentric astrology from the center of the sun, no planets ever go retrograde. They're just going around at the same rate they always go. But from our perspective, if you have a planet that is being aspected by one of these planets as it's turning or around the time of its retrograde, that becomes personally significant. And let's talk about what those planets in your chart might be. For example, the Capricorn Aquarius cluster, meaning the from lower degrees to higher, from the now Pluto, Jupiter, and Saturn. Those planets basically have been moving through, and if you add Jupiter into it, they will move through an area from about 20 degrees roughly of Capricorn all the way up through about 2 degrees, 1.5 degrees of Aquarius, which is where Saturn is or was when it turned retrograde just a few days ago, but it's barely moved. I mean, it takes the planets, the outer planets in particular, several days to build up any momentum when they change direction. So if you have in your natal chart a planet, let's say between 22 or 23 degrees, we may go back to 20 because Jupiter will go back that far. But if you have a planet in those degrees, let's say between, let's say 20 degrees of Capricorn to 1 degree of Aquarius, then one or more of these planets has gone over your sun or that particular planet. And then when it turns retrograde, it's going to repeat the energy, but from a different perspective. And then when it turns direct, it will go a third and final time over that same point. Now, for you, these retrogrades are more important than for everyone else. Not that they can't be important culturally, they certainly are. But I think it's a slightly different reason than what we would like to give. Also, if you have a planet, not only at, let's say, 20, let's pick a degree, let's say 26 degrees or 25 degrees of Capricorn. If you have a planet at 25 degrees of Capricorn, that's going to get hit by a conjunction of the retrograde Jupiter and Pluto. Saturn might not come all the way back to that point. If you have another planet or a planet at 25 degrees of any cardinal sign, Aries, well, Capricorn, Aries, Cancer, or Libra, these retrograde planets will either conjunct, square, or oppose your natal planets. So we want to isolate, because squares and conjunctions and oppositions are the most dynamic aspects when it comes to causing an event. So we want to look at a chart and see, do I have, or does this person have any planets in late degrees of cardinal or the very, very first degree of fixed? Because these are all planets that are getting tickled or touched. Maybe it's not a tickle. It's a tickle the first time, but if that tickle keeps happening over days and weeks and months, it becomes an irritation. If it still continues to happen, then it becomes a medical condition. And therein lies the importance of retrogrades, but I'm going to hold that for a moment because I just want to finish up this other piece of who gets impacted by these retrogrades. So let's say you have planets at, let's say, 25 or 26 degrees of another Earth sign, let's say Virgo or Taurus. That means that these retrograde planets, the Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, will be going direct, then retrograde, and then direct in trine, Earth to Earth. They're in Capricorn. So they'll be trining your planets at, let's say, 26 degrees of Virgo or 26 degrees of Taurus. Now, a trine often is not as difficult. It doesn't mean, again, we have to be careful of the good or bad. Often the trines are times, especially in transits, where we want to make changes, but the status quo is just easier to hold on to what we have. And yet, if you have those planets there, again, these retrogrades are affecting you by those aspects. Regardless of whether you have planets there or not, you can look in your birth chart and see what house or houses does late Capricorn and early Aquarius fall in my chart, because these are the areas of your life in which these retrogrades are impacting the most. Now, Venus is a separate issue because the Venus retrograde is occurring in Gemini. And so here we would want to say, all right, what planets do you have in Gemini? Because that Venus in Gemini is the entire time in Gemini. Venus is moving, I think it turns retrograde at 21 degrees and goes back to about 10. And so this whole range, if you have planets in that range in Gemini, or opposed in that, let's say, 10 to 20 degrees roughly of Sagittarius, or 10 to 20 degrees square from Gemini to, where am I? Pisces to Virgo, Pisces or Virgo, then that Venus retrograde is going to have your name particularly on it. However, if you have planets in mid-air signs, whether they're Libra or Aquarius, then this Venus retrograde is going to be harmonizing with your chart. In any instant, when you have that retrograde planet that's going to go over an expected point in your chart 3 times, and it has to, if it goes forward and it comes back, it's going to come back, it crosses it a second time, and then it goes forward and crosses it a third time. This may be the origin of the 3 strikes and you're out, even pre-baseball. Things happen in threes. You know, something happens on the direct, something happens a week or a month or 6 months later on the retrograde, and then it happens again on the third and final direct. Pluto and Neptune can move so slowly where they can go over the same point, not 3 times, but direct, retrograde 2, direct 3, retrograde 4, direct 5, and then not quite make it back there. So every planet has its own retrograde swing. The thing is that when you have a point that's being impacted by a transiting retrograde, the more work you can do on whatever the issue is that is stimulated around the first pass, the easier and more productive the second and third passes will be. The more in denial you are and shocked by what happens on the first pass and don't do anything, the deeper the shit will be by the second or the third pass. So retrogrades, rather than being feared, are invitations to a dance that actually are giving you more time to work something out in a particular area of your life. Before we move away from this completely, I've heard people again and again talk about like a Saturn return. Saturn return, for some people, Saturn just moves, here's the point, Saturn just moves through it. When it goes direct, it doesn't come back that far. So it's a clean pass. Saturn returns in my chart on January 4th, 1989, whatever, it doesn't matter what the date is. Boom, one day. For some people, Saturn makes that conjunction to where it was when you were born, the Saturn return. And then 2 or 3 months or 5 months later, it retrogrades, it goes back over that point, and then it turns direct and it goes over that point again. And I've heard so many people go, oh, I'm so dreading this. My Saturn return is going to last 9 months. You know, why couldn't I be lucky enough and just get it on one sweep? You know, so-and-so got it and it was just done. And here's the interesting thing, though. Often, the faster moving the planet and the cleaner the sweep, the more disruptive and harder it is to integrate it. When you get a transit like any retrograde 3 times, basically the universe is giving you a chance to get it right. It's like it's like it's like failing 3rd grade, which sucks if you want to be in 4th grade, but it's like you could have been in 4th grade and been over your head and then ruined your whole academic career because you never learned the vowels. So what you're doing, so the universe with a retrograde is giving you a chance to get it right. And if we would just stop thinking when the retrogrades are in motion that we have to get ahead, push ahead, get ahead, push ahead. Instead, it's, all right, I'm in a backwash right now. The riptide's going the other way. Just go with the damn flow and learn what it is to learn, because when that tide changes, and if you're ready, whoosh, away you go. Okay, that's my opening statement.
Your opening statement?
Well, I haven't gotten to another point that I want to get to, and it has to do with projection, but we'll get there in a moment.
Okay. Again, I just have to stop and marvel at that, what just happened. I know everybody else it's incredible. And it's making me so grateful that we have this technology and this way to get these downloads from you. I mean, what just happened was brilliant. It seems to be a regular occurrence every Friday. So I'm thinking it's just you. And here's the thing. So a question. So we have Saturn, Pluto, Venus, Jupiter, and then soon Mars, all retrograde this year.
Yeah. Oh, in fact, we have Mercury turning retrograde in the midst of this on June 17th. So
Okay.
So there are other planets that will come into the swirl, but yes.
Yeah. Okay. So why is there the conception around retrogrades that this is a bad thing? Number one. And number two, if it just means that the planets are closer to Earth, wouldn't that mean that we just experience their energy more directly?
Yes and no. All right.
Okay.
And this is, thank you for saying that, because when I said there's another point that I want to, that was point one, that this is the second point, and it's directly your question. And watching light bulbs go on, and astrologers who have used these techniques for so many years is like really interesting. And this isn't something I just thought up overnight. It's something that has come to me gradually over literally 30 plus years. And the more time I spend with this, the more this seems to make sense, not only to myself, but to people who I share it with, who then come back with, hey, and that means, and what about, and it just seems to be spreading. So here's the concept. The world we live in today, obviously, on so many levels, is so different than the world of our ancestors. We live in a world where we are all charged with being all you can be, become all you're capable of, do therapy, do yoga, practice this, study writing, write a book, go travel. I mean, not everyone is privileged to do all these things, but largely, more so than ever before in history, rather than being born into a station, living your life and dying in that same station, whether it was in a caste society, or whether even even in Greece or in Rome or in the Western world, and through through the Middle Ages, and even through modern times, if you were born a worker, you became a worker. Going to university was a rare thing. If you were born to parents who worked the land for the king, who were serfs, if you will, or a father who was a tradesman who made shoes or whatever, as a child, if you were a male, you learned to work the land or learned to make shoes. That's just what happened. You may have had a 2 or 3 or 5 or 8 year break in your life when you got kidnapped. I mean, when you got enrolled to be in the Army or Navy, but they didn't call it hijacking or Shanghaiing for nothing. You went to a bar for a pint and you woke up the next day on a ship headed for Shanghai. That's basically how the draft worked. But that was a Jupiterian experience of going, whether it was the military or for trade, and often the two are the same. Then you'd come back into your world. You would reconnect with the people from your village. You would get married and you would have a family, and that's where you would live your life. And that's where there was nowhere to go. That was it. So during those times, it was really important to live your life without making waves. And unfortunately, if you had a planet that made particularly awesome waves, it wasn't necessarily particularly awesome for you as a person. Let's say, for example, you were a woman that was born into a family, and there was basically the agriculture going on. Your dad was a farmer. As a child, you learned to do household chores, you learned to help in the garden, and eventually your family would pay someone to take you. That was basically, dowry. That was the marriage arrangement. It was basically, sell your daughter to someone else to have to deal with. Sad, but that's where we come from. That is true. But now let's say you were born with Mercury retrograde trine Uranus. So Mercury retrograde, again, at the beginning, I talked about these things called distance values. Well, to me, planets are like radio stations. They're all playing their own particular frequency. They're all playing their own particular rhythms, pulses, songs, however you want to frame that. When a planet is closer to Earth, meaning its distance value is higher, distance values actually go from 0 to 1, but I don't want to get into the technical piece of this. When a planet is louder, no, when a planet is closer to Earth, it's louder. So if you're born with a planet that's as far away from Earth as it can get, that planet's not going to be as loud as the radios, as the 50,000 watt radio station that's right in your backyard. You don't even need a radio to hear that damn station. You can turn your radio off and that station will come through, on a filling, on something. It'll somehow come through. So if you have a retrograde planet, it's like a radio station that's playing louder than everyone else's. When you have a retrograde, let's stick with the retrograde Mercury. We could do Venus just as well. Retrograde Venus would be fine. Let's say you were born with a retrograde Venus, and every time people were talking about things of beauty or something that they liked, you immediately came in with this heartfelt, well, I really love this and I want to paint this and all. And basically what would happen is your parents would go, that's ridiculous. You're a girl. You can't do that. Or you're a boy, but you're the shoemaker's son. You're not going to go off and paint. You're going to make shoes. So shut the hell up. And if you're going to continue to be like that, go to your room. So retrograde planets are often planets that naturally were hyper expressive, that were taught early on to go to their rooms. And this is why they can be negative. Hold that thought just for 1 second, because I want to bring into this mix the concept of hyperactivity in modern society, which may come from a number of different sources. And there's a rabbit hole that I'm sure would piss off a bunch of people if we went down, so we're not going down it. But there seems to be a very, an alarmingly large increase of ADHD, whatever you want to call the disorder or condition this month, this decade. The fact that some people, some children in particular, but certainly adults too, their nervous systems are so activated that they seem not to be able to sit in class quietly and pay attention. And therefore they become disruptive. So how are they treated? They're given a derivative of an amphetamine that like Ritalin, for example. I mean, there are many drugs, but these drugs are all drugs that are like amphetamine-like substances that basically take the hyperactive nervous system and make it even more hyperactive until it shuts down. That's what happens, because there reaches a point where yin becomes yang or yang becomes yin. And so this idea of treating hyperactivity with more hyperactivity is a way of pharmaceutically interrupting that process. And I would suggest that often retrograde planets get treated in that same kind of shutdown mode, where we basically are taught to shut it down because it's not socially acceptable to think so much, to talk so much, to love so much, to be attracted to so many things, to be so physical, Mars retrograde, to have so many big ideas and want to accomplish so much, Jupiter retrograde. Each of the planets retrograde has their own story, but they each in a way attract the environmental things that then shut it down. And here's where it becomes a problem. And this is something that I come back to in so many facets of my teaching. And it's based on Freud, what I call Freud 101. It's the concept of projection. Every planet just wants to be heard. Every planet just wants a voice. Every part of us wants to be acknowledged. We just want to be loved for who we are. And when some part of us needs to shut down, we then unconsciously project it so it appears out there rather than in here. And we engage it as something out there, and there it becomes problematic. that is the origin of why the water houses traditionally, I think, are so difficult. The 12th house is considered to be like just a horrific place. I mean, I might be caricaturizing or exaggerating, but, you know, traditionalists tend to take a hard look at the 8th, 4th, 8th, and 10th, but the 8th and 4th, 8th, and 12th, or the 8th and 12th, particularly hard, and for good reason, because those are houses that, in a patriarchal driven world that is about things that are manifest, those things that have to do with feelings and intuition and spirituality and emotions are things that are shut down. And things that are shut down become your downfall. The 12th house is institutions, hospitals, jails. It's the secret enemies that get you in the end. And I think it was Oscar Wilde who once cleverly said, an enemy will stab you in the back, think 12th house, whereas a friend will stab you in the front, think 7th house. It's interesting that the 7th house is the house of marriage and open enemies. Not, I didn't make that up. That's the traditional, you know. And so, but an open enemy is like a lover. An open enemy is like a real friend. William Blake wrote, you know, friendship is based on contraries. You need that contrary to make progression. So, full swing, retrogrades are difficult when they are suppressed or repressed. When I have a client with retrograde planets and they are suffering from the quote unquote typical retrograde dilemmas, my suggestions, my remedies are not how do you get rid of those negative aspects, but how do you express that planet more? Those negative aspects will follow you around forever until that Mercury gets a voice, until Venus feels like she is free to love and be loved and feel pleasure. If that Venus is not allowed to feel pleasure and she's retrograde, she's going to die inside and therefore attract icky events on the outside that might forever remind her that her Venus is not okay.
Okay, so for people who are listening and thinking, how do I know if I have planets retrograde in my chart? It'll normally be noted with an R or an RX, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And the amazing thing is in the Saturn workshop, I started digging and I realized I have Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, and North Node all retrograde.
Well, the nodes are always retrograde.
Okay.
They travel retrograde, and every now and then, if you're using the true node, they move, they wobble. The nodes are a total different story. I pay no attention to the retrograde around the North Node.
Got it. Okay, but the rest of them pay attention to. And what you're saying is,
but what that tells me, without knowing your chart, that all I know is you're a Capricorn, right?
yes.
All right. So if you have all of those planets retrograde, they are all in signs that are either in opposition or closer to opposition than conjunction to your sun, because that's when a planet is, that's at least for Mars, all the outer planets, they go retrograde when they're far away from the sun. Mm-hmm. So those planets are basically, if they're far away from the sun, they're close to Earth, meaning when I said far away from the sun, in opposition to the sun. It turns out that if in a chart you have a planet in opposition to the sun, which looking at the chart means it looks like it's far away from the sun. If you have a planet that's opposed the sun, or even within 2 or 3 signs of being opposed the sun, they're on the same side of the sun as the Earth. Therefore, they're closer to Earth. Therefore, they have to be retrograde. You cannot have a planet, an outer planet, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. You cannot have an outer planet that is close within a sign or two to being in opposition without it being retrograde. It has to be. There's nothing wrong with it. It's the natural rhythm. It's louder. It means that planet is louder. And the problem that we're suffering with so many of these planets now retrograde is that we have a lot of energy that's radio stations we're used to listening to. And once a year, we get 1 or 2 of them louder than the others. And right now we have 4 of them blaring. That's what makes this difficult.
And so what do you think? Okay, so if in a patriarchal society, certain elements of us are not being, they're not allowed to be expressed, or
That's
they're
right.
not encouraged, and we're told to be quiet or go to our room on these
Well, it's
certain
the
things.
patriarchal society that would suppress the water and or Venus, whatever. But it may be any society that might suppress or try to minimize anything in a child that was too loud, so to speak. So
Right.
as
Right.
much as I love bashing the patriarchy, of which I guess I am a part of, the fact of the matter is it can't all be blamed on that.
Right. So going forward,
Yeah,
post this time that we're in,
yeah.
how would you, so okay, if there's certain things in our chart that have been suppressed, and in order to really experience fulfillment and meaning in our lives, we probably need to express those things because they want to be heard. Yeah.
Yeah, or at least strive to discover ways to bring them more into expression. Yeah,
Right. If, okay, so the cosmos is order and beauty. And so this year we're experiencing lots and lots of retrograde activity.
right.
What do you think the invitation would be for this particular time to have all this retrograde activity and all these stations blaring at us all at the same time, amongst all these other things that are happening? What do you think the order and beauty is in that?
Well, I think some of it, and you really don't need to be an astrologer to make this leap. Some of it is simply forced introspection. It's when there's that much going on that's not being expressed, that doesn't mean we can't be aware of what it is that we're not doing or not expressing, or what we would like to do, or what an ideal world might be. And even though I'm working this job and I feel like I need to support my kids or my whatever, even though this is what I have to do, that doesn't mean I can't harbor dreams and hopes and wishes for something that would be different. And often what happens is that rather than harboring those dreams while still working on the job, we shut the dreams down. Once they become invisible, that's when they become dangerous, because it's not the things that we're aware of that get us, it's the things that we're not aware of that get us. And so I think that with so many planets retrograde, I think that part of the call is a call to go inward, to become more silent, to pull back. And I don't think we have a choice, and although we're in this crazy dance of extended, extreme perspectives on any and every spectrum, just because the quarantine has been declared over by some people, doesn't mean that that's going to be the end of this deal, whatever this deal is. And just to be perfectly fair, just because some people think that this quarantine is not only necessary, but maybe necessary forever, that doesn't mean that that's the right deal either. There's this whole period of simply becoming aware of that which you normally are not aware of, exclude, dismiss, think is ridiculous, because what's happening now is that we're all being forced to widen our perspectives rather than to just hold one perspective and think that's the only way to look at it, whatever it is.
So in our inward reflection, could there also be the question, what is the part of me that I am suppressing? What is the part of me that I haven't let express fully, and not to, again, not to do anything with it right now, but just to become aware?
Yes, yeah, and even that's a tricky thing, because you did use the correct word, but there's two things here. There's one is, what am I suppressing? And the other is, what am I repressing? And the difference being that the only thing that you can analyze is what you're suppressing, because you can't know that you are repressing, but it's the shit that you're repressing that's often even more destructive than the stuff that you're suppressing. And so another question becomes, what tools can I employ that will enable me to make the invisible, that which I am repressing and don't even know it, what tools can I employ to bring some of those things into vision? And that's a lot more frightening. I mean, it's one thing to say, I know that I do this, and I'm going to examine it. And I hate the thought of examining it because I know why I do it and I don't want to not do it. And so, but I'll examine it. That's one thing. But that's nothing compared to, there are things that I don't do, I'll never do. And even though everyone says I do, I really don't. And those are the things that we need to look at too.
Mm. Okay. And you said something about the difference of perspectives and that being able to look at all different kinds of points of view right now. Am I getting that right? You said something different than that, but can you?
Yeah, well, I think in that journey inward, in that retrograde dance, I think that we are also being asked to step beyond. Well, some of this is not just about the retrograde dance. Some of this is also about these retrogrades happening at the time when Saturn, the planet of boundaries. Now remember, Saturn's boundaries are not just they're not just boundaries between nation states, although they are those. I mean, Saturn is the boundary between, between Pakistan and India. It's the boundary between the United States and Mexico. It's the boundary between Hong Kong and China. These are all real boundaries. But Saturn is also the boundaries between Trumpers and never Trumpers. It's the boundaries between people who think that vaccines can save the world and people who think that vaccines are actually going to kill the world. Now, again, I'm not taking a side on this. Those of you know me. I mean, I certainly do have opinions, but that's not the point of today's discussion. Today's discussion is that when Saturn and Pluto line up, boundaries that we thought were firm and solid, whether they were nation states, whether they were religious beliefs, whether they were visions of perfect health, those boundaries disintegrate. They're deconstructed. We have boundary issues right now. And the virus, COVID-19, is simply one symptom of an attack on our boundaries. And it's particularly insidious because latest statistics in New York, over the last 2 weeks, 66% of the new COVID-19 cases occurred with people who are self-quarantined. 20% occurred with people who were in required emergency, essential role, people who are actually out working jobs. Now, what does this mean? I don't know, but I do know that's the data. And do I trust the data? I take all data with a grain of salt these days, but it is data, and it's data that that Governor Cuomo revealed with a, I don't know what to make of this, but this is what happened in New York in the past couple of weeks. What does this mean? It means that our boundaries are being infringed upon. And again, I've said this for weeks, the real epidemic or pandemic is the pandemic of fear, because we don't know what the hell to do to keep out the invaders. We can't just build a wall and paint it black, and say, stay off or stay out. And so this is part of the deeper thing that's going on. And so coming back to your question, I think it's the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which even though technically it occurred, is still with us for a year or so. But also the fact that Saturn is now moving into a new sign, into a new element, and it's joining up with Jupiter. That'll happen by the end of this year. There's this sense of us being in a state of, it's like pre-settled alloy. I read this very brilliant article where it described the condition that we're in is kind of like a state of quantum consciousness. It's like we're in a dream state. And in a dream state, what's true? Well, everything. What's real? Everything and nothing. It's like we are in a state right now where everything is potential and field and is possibility rather than actuality. And so this is why it is so important for us not to prematurely focus on a point, on a position, especially if it's something that we think we know, because if you think you know it, that's a good clue to suggest that there may be some fear involved and that we don't. I mean, I'm less concerned with what's being said outside of the party line than I am with how much censorship there is right now, because when things are shut down, there's always something else going on. You know, it's like, you know, we live in a society that's founded on the principle of honest and open debate to come to a point. And when there can't be debate because you're not allowed to say this or you're not allowed to say that, that to me is frightening, even though some of the things that some of the people are saying are also frightening. But that's the point, is that we have to, if we're going to survive this, we have to open up our minds so that we can at least allow for perspectives and points of view that are not ours. Because ultimately we are going to come out of this one way or another, and we're going to either come out of it in one extreme, which sucks, the other extreme, which sucks just as bad, or somewhere in the middle that takes into account multiple levels of extremes.
Well, what I'm pleased and hopeful about is seeing platforms springing up that are sort of taking the carried over censored things and hosting them, which I think is a good thing. You know, and there's an opportunity for someone who is like, well, I'll let people have voices, I'll let people debate, I'll let different perspectives be seen. So I think that's positive. I hear you. Well, so far, yeah, I hear what you're saying though. It is in general, the fact that there's so much censorship happening. Did you see the cop in Seattle who went on and made a YouTube video asking other police officers to really like check their own consciousness about what they're being asked to do to people? Oh, this is a good one. I got to share with you. Anyways, the guy got fired over it. And he was asked to take it down, and he said, no, because this is what I know is right. And I'm encouraging other people to do what's right. So how can I take this down? But it's really interesting to watch
actually,
those.
I did see that.
Yeah.
And you see, the thing is that all this stuff is really tricky because there's no extreme positions that work completely, and yet we need the extreme positions to combat the extremity at the other end. And so it's a very dangerous place. I think it's hexagram 27 or hexagram 28 that in the Wilhelm Baines translation, it went something like, the ridgepole sags to a breaking point. It furthers the great man to have somewhere to go. Now, the ridgepole was basically used in creating bridges. It's a metaphor. And when the ridgepole sags to a breaking point, it means that the thing that holds these 2 points together, you know, is falling apart. So it makes sense to have somewhere where you can move that's still stable, even when that falls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, Rick, I was in the car with my daughters last night, and Maui is a new place because there's no tourists here. So it's quiet. There's no one at the ocean. And they were saying that they really like it. You know, they're like, wow, it's really nice. You know, there's not as many people around. Like, it'd be nice if it could stay this way. And I said, when this is part of our introspection that we're in right now. And I said, well, girls, if we shut down the border to Hawaii or Maui and said people can't come here anymore, would you be okay with not being able to go other places? And would you be, if we know that it's better for the earth not to be flying so much, would you sacrifice your dreams of traveling all over the world? Because they both have dreams of traveling all over the world. Would you sacrifice it in order to do what's better for the earth? And it was really amazing to hear the thought process and the dialogue. But these are the kinds of questions. It's like, we know that taking a break on the planet has allowed certain things to happen. Are we willing to make those sacrifices long term And I think this is, again, part of the introspective process. I don't think there's a quick and easy answer to any of these questions.
No,
And
no.
that's not the point. But the point is and my daughter, Madeline said, yes, she would sacrifice she would sacrifice her ability to travel. And Sophia couldn't get over the fact that all of our family's in California. And that would be just so hard to never be able to see them again. So it's, these are big, huge questions, and all of the things that we're facing on every level are so complex. And like you said last week, confusing. And so again, it's not really the point to find the answers right now, but to go. Yes.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think one of the things to keep in mind is that although we want answers, many people want things to return to normal, but just as many people say, no, they were never normal, even when they were.
Yes.
So is there some way we can return to something slightly different than normal so that, we learn something from this?
Right.
The fact of the matter is that with all these planets retrograde, as an astrologer, it pretty much convinces me. And although I must say that astrology is not mechanical and the universe always has surprises, but this pretty much convinces me that the idea of a quick fix, the idea of this thing being done, and things returning to normal in a week or a month or 2 months, just ain't going to happen. Even though Venus goes direct toward the end of June, the outer planets don't turn direct until September. And by then, Mars, which goes into Aries, Mars has been going through a sign every 6 weeks. Mars gets into Aries and stays there for, I think, 6 months. And it does its retrograde dance in Aries. And Mars loves being in Aries. Why? Because it wants to get shit done. Mars in Aries is like right now, boom, let's deal. And then it turns retrograde, for 2.5 months. 2 months.
Well, I've been thinking of the term just, what is it from one of the poems, just settling in for a long winter's nap. It's like, it feels like this year is just settling in for a long.
It was the night before Christmas.
There you go. Thank you.
Right.
But I think our entire community knows that at this point, listening to all of you, that I don't think anybody has any hopes of a quick, okay, oh, wow, it just went away. And now we're just back to life as usual. We're in this one. And I think instead of wishing for the quick fix, it's what do I need to learn through this process? Who am I becoming in this process? How can I contribute to the outcome? And just staying open.
Yeah. And sometimes it's not just staying open. Sometimes if there's an issue to force, it's forcing ourselves to be open to something that we are sure was not true. It's like, and again, I'm not pushing any one agenda here. I'm saying that all of us on any side, every side of every extreme thought spectrum needs to practice what it would be like. And I may have told this story, but a number of years ago, someone who I spend time with in Bali, who is a real mover and a shaker on many levels on global politics and waking people up. And I admire what this person is doing. This must have been about 5 years ago. Basically, with a group of people, tried to convince me that Earth was flat. They just bought completely into the flat Earth thing. And although this person holds some other perspectives that at first I wasn't willing to go with, I've always been willing to entertain them. Flat Earth, I was not willing to entertain. I said, this is not a theory, it's just stupidity. However, after those initial conversations, I went back home from Bali, back to Seattle, and I spent some time digging into the Flat Earth Society and watching videos, and although I realized that there were too many things that didn't work. I didn't know which of the videos that I saw were based upon truth or not. I didn't have the way of judging them, but it did this for me. It put me through several weeks, maybe months, of thinking about how do I know what I think I know. I mean, everything I know about stuff like that, I've been taught. And I've been taught by other people who thought they knew. And if we had lived 400 years ago, we would have been taught by wise people who knew that it was the center, and that the planets went around it. And if we, and just our whole sense of things we get fed from either church or science, both of which have its own slates of axioms that it uses to say if something is going to be true, it first has to be meet this. I've talked many times about the problem with science. One of the many problems is this idea of repeatability. That David Hume and the Scot who came up with the idea of the making a hypothesis and the experiment, what we call the experimental method. It's huge. I love science. I love the things that it's given us. However, it has its limitations, because according to science, if something only happens once, it didn't happen. It's not scientific. In order for something to be scientific, it has to happen again and again and again and again, which is really the underbelly of why astrology is not scientific, because you only happened once and I only happened once. And therefore, every moment is unique. And so in a way, astrology is non-scientific right at the start, because it can't be based upon repeatability. We can look at repeatable cycles like the lunar cycle and the Mars cycle or the Saturn cycle or so on, but these are pulling things out of the greater whole. Anyhow, I digress, but that's...
Rick, you brought that up last week. You brought that story up about the flat earth and how you walked away thinking, how do I know? But don't worry, because
our relationship is over. I'm already repeating stories.
It's okay. I'm glad you brought it up, because I've kind of been tripping out about it ever since. Just asking myself that same question, how do I know what I know? And realizing that most of the things that we think we know are basically things that other people have told us, many different sources. And then there's the things that you know because you've had direct experience with them and you've gone through your own process with them. But even those,
if we only trusted this is one of the arguments of, for flat Earth. If we were flying through space at hundreds of thousands of miles an hour, we'd feel the wind on us. Mm-hmm. Therefore, we're not.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, anyways, I think it's a really good question. And I think it's a really important one for all of us, like you said, at this time, to be, how do I know that I know that? Or why do I think that I know that? And that's a deep rabbit hole right there. I can see why you walked with that question for like 2 months.
Yeah. And what if that was true? What would that mean? And how would I live with that? And could I live with that if that really turned out to be the truth? And I would say take your worst nightmares of things that you don't want to be true, that someone else is saying true, and make them true and live with them in your head. Experiment with that, because that's the only way we're going to dig out of this. And that's for everyone, both sides of every issue.
Rick, thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for hanging out with us while we have this cosmic connection. I'm so happy that we defined the name, that we went deep into the retrogrades, both what they are, what they mean right now, and that we've been able to share this lovely conversation with this amazing audience. So thanks everybody for being here. Have a wonderful weekend. Rick, thanks again. I can't wait to hang out with you next Friday. Yeah. All right, everybody, take care.